just over 10 years ago. I was fresh out of college and had moved back to my parents' house for free rent and food for 9 months, right before I was leaving state for graduate school. To earn some scratch, I took a part-time gig doing some light bookkeeping for a small business owner that my dad knew. They had a business where you could rent low-level farm equipment, a small mom-and-pop type thing in sticks. Since they knew my family, they trusted me to go in there for about 15 or 20 hours a week and check and file rental forms, make sure nobody missed a payment, or answer an email, or discuss prices, availability, etc. Super easy gig. The old building where I worked was about 90 years old and at the top of this little hill. I could work any hours I wanted to, as long as the work got done, so I'd usually go in after 7 PM and stay until around midnight or 1 AM. Since I knew I'd be alone, I could listen to music loud and take my time. The office was on the second floor of the building and looked out onto the long driveway. One night during winter, it had snowed a few inches, but I was so desperate to get out of the house, so I went into work at about 8 PM. I always left the gate open at the bottom of the hill, since, believe me when I say that, nobody ever showed up at night. We were literally in the middle of nowhere. To even turn onto our short road, you had to only be coming to our specific building and know it was there beforehand. So I was jamming away to some Fallout Boy and having some coffee, and I kept glancing at the snow outside as I worked, since our one orange streetlight reflected onto the ground at the gate, and that was causing light to shine off the snow in a really cool way. Around midnight, I went downstairs to do my bathroom business, then came back upstairs and got settled back into work. I probably did about 5 minutes of work, when I glanced outside and saw a huge imprint of something in the fresh snow just below the orange light. It seemed like a huge dog or substantial animal had just rolled around on the ground on their back or something. Since I didn't notice it just 15 minutes before, it had to have happened while I was in the bathroom. I shook it off and assumed an animal was attracted to the orange light or something. At around 2 AM, I was leaving and got out of my car to lock the gate. And to be honest, I had pretty much forgotten about the imprint in the snow. But when I looked down, I was shocked to see that it wasn't just some disturbed snow, but it was undeniably the imprint of a human-made snow angel. I used to make snow angels when I was a kid, and they're also very recognizable, so I 100% knew for sure that's what it was. But it wasn't from a kid, it was from a very large person. And I already knew, whoever had made this snow angel could easily have looked up and have seen me through that window, so they must have waited for me to head downstairs to the bathroom to make this snow angel. No cars had pulled up into our building. I would have seen or heard them, even from the bathroom. So I glanced around for footprints in the snow and saw that there was one set that led to the nearby woods to the right side of our building. It was clear that the person didn't use the road, but instead came from the opposite side, which instantly made me uneasy, since that side was just trees and darkness for miles and miles. By now, I was freaking out and trying to get back to my SUV. And that's when I heard it. Before I could get inside, I heard a loud, high-pitched laughing coming from the woods. It almost sounded like a fake laugh, like the witch in The Wizard of Oz, like someone was doing it to fake on purpose. It was close enough that I knew they could see me, but I couldn't see them at all, since other than that street light I was under, there was no illumination. After a few seconds of laughing, it stopped. And then it was just silence everywhere, except for my heart's beating through my ears. Then the laughing started again, though louder this time, more like screaming and laughing combined. I sort of froze for like 5 seconds, listening in panic. Now, I spent a lot of time in that area, and I know what coyotes and foxes sound like at night with their high-pitched screeches during mating season, but this was very, very human. It felt like it was an adult male trying to emulate a woman laughing, like someone was deliberately trying to make a fake scary shriek laugh in order to scare someone. Well, it freaking worked. After 5 seconds, I immediately filled up with adrenaline, got in my car and drove the hell away from there as fast as I could without sliding off the road. I worked there for another 6 weeks or so and never had a single issue. though I knew where my boss kept his gun, and I always made sure it was there before I started my shift. And I certainly always locked that gate from then on. So, my uncle used to work a lot when I was younger. He's done a lot of different things to make money, but one consistent thing is that in summer months and into late fall, he paints houses. It's a legitimate business and everything. He's got a truck with a number and a name and supplies in the back, the real deal. Every now and then he would call my dad when he needed a little extra help, and I'd work for him. No big deal really, it's just painting houses. What could possibly go wrong? Well, it takes a while to paint the whole house. If the weather conditions aren't right, then you can't paint. One particular fall was extremely wet. It rained what felt like every single day. My uncle would paint multiple houses at a time, so sometimes he would get caught up due to situations like these, and at work a little more than usual. That was fine by me though. The job wasn't hard and it paid very well. Anyway, it was a warm day for late fall, but there was still a distinct chill in the air. One that kind of penetrated through you and stung your soul. My uncle had this job he had to finish. It was an old Victorian house in a quiet part of a town. An old lady and her husband, who was an author, lived there. Due to the weather, it had taken longer than expected to paint the house, and there were family issues going on at the time, which further complicated things. So, my uncle gets a call one day from the lady who lives in the house. She says that her husband is trying to write his next book, but he keeps getting distracted by the scaffolding outside the house, so she wanted to know if we could come over and finish the job as soon as possible. My uncle was always an honest businessman. They had contracted him to do the job in midsummer, but he had lots going on that summer, and the wet conditions I mentioned made it difficult to finish anything. However, these people were insistent but really polite, and not wanting to lose customers or get bad recommendation, my uncle decided to put the house as high priority. After all, it would only take a day or two to finish. So, we show up to this house mid-afternoon. Like I said, it was a weird kind of chilly that day, and I also remember a really eerie calm. As we arrived, we moved straight to the back. The front of the house was already been done, so there was nothing left to do there. My uncle, being the more experienced painter, would always do the touch-ups, and I would simply apply the first coats, since they took little skill. Anyway, we get to the back, and he asks me if I'm scared of heights. I was 17 at the time, and although they do creep me out a little, I didn't want to seem like a child to my uncle, so I told him I wasn't. He was happy to hear that. He has me climb up to the scaffold to the 3rd floor to finish an upper section of the house. There was a window up there, a small little oval one that looked into the attic. The attic also happened to be the husband's study. He would do most of his writing in there. So I'm climbing up the scaffolding, cans of paints dangling behind me, and various paintbrushes and other tools in the utility belt my uncle let me borrow. I get to the top of the scaffolding and set all my supplies down. I crack open a can of paint and start painting like he taught me. Outside of the temperature, the overcast, and the eerie calm, this day was like any other. I'm working my way across the top part of the house when I get to the window that looks into the study. I bend down, dip my paintbrush, and stand back up to paint above the window. The window was in direct line of sight, and I couldn't help gazing in. I see a man, the husband, staring back at me with a face completely barren of any emotion. I had never seen a face so devoid of feeling before. Of course, I get startled and take a step back. I chuckle and smile at the guy, but he doesn't smile back. Instead, while remaining completely emotionless, he turns his back to me and walks out of the study. I continued painting, when all of a sudden, I hear a loud bang, a muffled explosion almost. I freaked out. I thought my uncle fell from a great height on the scaffold below him. As I climb down to check what's going on, I hear the old lady scream at the top of her lungs. The old man had shot himself in the upstairs bathroom. Alerted by the gunshot, my uncle fell off the scaffolding from the 2nd story. He was lucky enough to land in a bush and only suffer a broken ankle and a few scratches. The biggest wound that day happened to our mental health. I had to go to counseling for a while. It's been years since then, and I still remember that man's face. I've never forgotten it. It would always be burned in the back of my head. Now I know why. Looking back, his face was so devoid of emotion, because he never felt any emotion at all. He literally didn't care about anything he was doing. As it turns out, the man was seriously depressed and facing marital issues with his wife. Combined with a few too many nights drunk on whiskey and facing writer's block, I guess he decided he couldn't take it anymore. His wife moved out of the house shortly after, and we never finished the job. To this day, that house remains abandoned, and I try not to drive down the street it's on. I'm scared that if I do and happen to pass the backyard, I'll see that man's face staring back at me from the window, cold and emotionless. Fresh out of nursing school, I got my first real job in a fairly large hospital, in a department that I honestly never thought I would ever work in. It was a 6-bed cardiac ICU, with rooms that overlooked the city capitol building. It was a very nice unit, and I started out working 12-hour night shifts. The hospital I worked at had 4 other ICUs that were always full, so my unit always ended up being code bed, meaning if someone was arrested or went downhill fast somewhere around the hospital, they came to us. I had been working there for over a year now, and I was no stranger to death. Each patient of mine who had died on my shift was usually already on their way out. Their families were by their side, the DNR order was signed, and the funeral home was already picked out. It was rarely ever a surprise. In fact, the only time I was ever needed to do CPR on my shift, it was not even my department. So I went on a nice long 2-week vacation, got engaged, and had a beautiful tan. On my first night back, I received a report from the day charge nurse. She said she was off for a few days, and suggested to remind the next day charge nurse that the priest was coming in the morning to bless room 4. I thought she was kidding at first, but she was serious. Apparently, while I was on vacation, every patient who was admitted to that room had died. But this came as no shock to me. People died often in our department, and it being a very religious institution, having a chaplain for almost every department, I just shook it off. Then she said room 4 was empty, and that it would serve as code bed for the night. Around 2 a.m., I got a call saying that they have someone to fill our open bed. The ICU downstairs was now going to be code bed, so we were getting your run-of-the-mill chest pain, take a look in the morning kind of patients. Nothing to get excited about at all. We get the patient admitted and all settled in room 4. He was a gentleman about 50 or so years old, very pleasant. His wife was with him, and she looked dead on her feet. I got her some warm blankets, and took her to our waiting room that had cots so she could get some rest. Around 3:30, I was watching monitors and the cameras in each room. All the patients were fast asleep. The cameras all cycled through about 3 seconds on each small TV we had on the desk. Room 1 was fine. Room 2 was fine. Room 3 was fine. Room 4, there was some kind of blurred shadow in there. It cycled too quickly for me to get a good look, and the doors to the unit were locked. Maybe the other nurse let his wife back in. I walked down the hall and glanced inside. There was nobody. I shrugged it off. It was late, and I was tired. I was probably just seeing things. I went back to my desk and continued watching the screen. Room 1, Room 2, Room 3, Room 4. I was not imagining anything. There was someone in Room 4. There was some kind of shadowy blur standing in the room's corner. I could not move my body. It cycled through again. This time, it was closer to the patient's bed, by maybe 2 or 3 feet. The hair stood straight up on my neck. The next time it cycled through, it was even closer. It stood directly in the light coming from the hallway, but despite the light, it was still shrouded in darkness. It cycled through again, and it was right next to the bed. My heart started pounding, and I could barely speak to the nurse on the other end of the desk. As soon as my words formed and I was able to make some kind of noise to get her attention, the alarm on the monitor went off, signaling that the patient had a cardiac arrest. The overhead system came on. A cart is needed in CCU room 4. People poured into the department. Doctors, nurses, pharmacists, respiratory therapists. They all rushed into the room, but I couldn't move. It cycled through the rooms again. Room 4 came up, and this time the lights were on, and there were 10 to 15 people surrounding the bed, doing CPR and slamming meds into his IV. Someone went to get his wife from the waiting room, but it was too late. The man died of a heart attack. Room 4 was blessed that morning, right on schedule, and I put in my 2 weeks notice. I couldn't handle it anymore.